Christopher Nolan is, without a doubt, the absolute king of Hollywood right now. Let me explain what I mean by that. He's not just the most recognizable director working today, he is arguably the very last true movie star left. And by that, I mean he's literally the only person in the industry who can consistently pack theaters based purely on his name being on the poster. There is absolutely no better proof of that massive gravitational pull than the billion-dollar Oscar-sweeping triumph we just saw with Oppenheimer. I mean, really think about what he did there. He took a dense 3-hour biographical film, shot a massive chunk of it in stark black and white, and filled it with scenes of people just sitting in claustrophobic rooms intensely talking about quantum physics and security clearances. And what happened? It made nearly $1 billion and completely swept the Academy Awards, including Best Picture. That is the undeniable sheer power of the Nolan brand.
Now, usually when we sit down to break down a Christopher Nolan film, the biggest complaints I end up having are incredibly minor. Honestly, they're almost nitpicky. As movie lovers, we might debate his questionable sound mixing, right? You know the feeling, watching one of his movies at home, your thumb just constantly hovering over the remote's volume button because the dialogue is a barely audible whisper, but the explosions are absolutely deafening. Or maybe we spent time debating the theoretical physics in Interstellar, or whether the pacing in The Dark Knight Rises was a bit uneven. But despite those tiny grievances, the guy's movies just print money. He commands the most enthusiastic, dedicated fan base I've ever seen for a modern filmmaker. And that is exactly what makes his current situation so incredibly unusual and frankly, completely fascinating to unpack.
So that brings us to the real puzzle here. We have to figure out why the undisputed top dog of Hollywood is suddenly tangled up in this messy, highly controversial game when he absolutely does not have to be. Why is a director, who is literally famous for his strict, uncompromising adherence to realism and practical effects, suddenly finding himself dragged into a sprawling online culture war over his upcoming $250 million mythological epic based on Homer's The Odyssey? He has completely earned our benefit of the doubt for sure, but the creative choices that are leaking out about this production have completely shattered the internet. Let's break down step by step exactly what is going on here.
Let's start by looking at part 1, the casting controversies. Myths, stars, and backlash.
Okay, so looking at this massive ensemble cast, we definitely have to acknowledge that some of these choices are perfectly solid. Take Matt Damon as Odysseus. Sure, he might not be everyone's very first instinct, but it's really not a bad choice at all. And then you've got this powerhouse lineup of established talent. Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, Anne Hathaway, Jon Bernthal, Charlize Theron. That is a heavy-hitting roster. But once you look past that core group, we step into some deeply polarizing decisions that have left people just scratching their heads. Take the casting of rapper Travis Scott as the Bard, for instance. When Nolan was asked about this, he said, and I quote, "I cast him because I wanted the nod towards the idea that this story has been handed down as oral poetry which is analogous to rap. We've really got to unpack that logic. Does a modern rap analogy actually work for an ancient Greek epic? Or does it just completely shatter that classical immersion? Trying to tie one of the foundational pieces of ancient Western literature directly to contemporary rap music is a massive creative leap, and traditional fans are seriously questioning if the entire tone of this epic is going to feel wildly out of place."
And the casting debates definitely don't stop there. We also have Zendaya and John Leguizamo. Let's talk about Zendaya first. She is stepping into the role of the goddess Athena, and there is a lot of skepticism out there. In classical mythology, Athena isn't just any character. She is the formidable goddess of wisdom and war. She's supposed to be this commanding, terrifying, awe-inspiring presence. A lot of viewers are openly wondering if Zendaya has the immense mythological acting range required to pull off a deity like that, or if we're just seeing a highly visible modern pop culture star slotted into an ancient world to sell tickets. Then, on top of that, we have the intense debate over John Leguizamo playing a Eumaeus. Leguizamo has taken some very strict, highly publicized stances in the past about ethnic casting, fiercely arguing that Latinos should strictly play Latino roles. So fans are quick to point out the glaring historical and geographical irony of him stepping into a prominent role right in the middle of ancient Greece. This whole situation perfectly illustrates the massive friction right now between modern Hollywood practices and ancient mythology. Look at the official casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, literally the face that launched 1,000 ships. This decision set off an intense backlash online. What we're looking at here is a fundamental, head-on collision between modern Hollywood's push for global, contemporary casting sensibilities and the highly specific regional origins of Spartan and Greek mythology. Purists are incredibly vocal about this, arguing that Helen of Troy has a very specific historical and geographical context tied directly to the Aegean Sea. But the studio, they seem to be treating the mythology like a totally blank slate for modern representation. This philosophical difference in how to actually adapt classical literature is creating a huge rift with the audience. But honestly, the online firestorm didn't truly go nuclear until those explosive social media rumors started swirling around Elliot Page. For weeks, we saw massive rumors and some genuinely glorious internet memes claiming that Page was potentially cast as either the legendary warrior Achilles or maybe another underworld figure like the fallen sailor Elpenor. This rumor gained so much incredible traction that it actually broke into mainstream news, with high-profile figures chiming in just to express their total disbelief. Now, whether Page is playing a ghost, a crew member, or Achilles himself, the sheer volume of chaotic discourse around this unconfirmed casting just proves exactly how hypersensitive audiences have become to the creative direction of this particular film.
Let's transition over to part 2, breaking the immersion, the Bronze Age paradox.
So the casting is really only half the story here. We need to deeply analyze this incredible clash between Nolan's legendary commitment to technical realism and the film's baffling historical inaccuracies. Because when you sit down for a Nolan film, you expect a grounded, tactile reality, right? But the choices happening here are drastically breaking the audience's immersion. Let me explain this bizarre contrast. On one hand, you have phenomenal, undeniable technical achievements. Nolan literally had his team build a real, fully seaworthy ship capable of handling the rough chop of the Mediterranean, and they actually sailed it from Morocco to Greece to Italy. That is mind-blowing craftsmanship. But on the other hand, he instructed his brilliant composer, Ludwig Göransson, to skip the traditional orchestra. Instead, the film's score is reportedly being built using 35 gongs run through modern electronic synthesizers. The studio's justification? Well, they said they didn't have orchestras back then. Okay, true, but they definitely didn't have electronic synthesizers either. It creates this completely jarring juxtaposition between extreme physical realism and bizarre modernism.
Which leads me to pose this direct question to you. How does a director who went out of his way to build a literal atomic bomb simulation, a guy who is endlessly committed to realism, how does he handle the ancient aesthetics of the Bronze Age? You would naturally expect meticulous historical research. You'd expect authentic materials, bronze weaponry, period-appropriate clothing. Well, let me reveal the most glaring, visually confusing anachronism of this entire production. When the early production stills leaked, audiences literally could not believe what they were seeing. Instead of historically accurate Bronze Age armor, the production is using full, bulky, obese plate steel armor paired with late 15th century Italian barbute helmets. I'm not kidding. We are talking about outfitting ancient Greek mythological figures in steel plate armor straight out of the Italian Renaissance. That is a historical gap of thousands of years. Critics are passionately arguing that this completely and utterly shatters the verisimilitude of the world. They're comparing it to watching a movie set in the Roman Empire where all the centurions are running around carrying World War II rifles. Fans are just left throwing their hands up asking, what exactly are they doing here, and why is the physical aesthetic so completely disconnected from the actual era? And the crazy thing is, the immersion shatters even further the absolute second these characters open their mouths. Dialogue is the lifeblood of classical grandeur. In any mythological epic, the way the characters speak sets the tone for the entire universe. Yet here we have British actors using American accents to play ancient Greeks. And they're using highly modern vernacular that completely strips away any sense of that necessary classical weight. You literally have ancient mythological characters yelling out highly contemporary phrases like, let's go, or using modern terms of endearment like dad or daddy. When you combine the Renaissance-era armor, the electronic synthesizer score, and the modern American slang, the entire aesthetic and auditory experience of the film just feels wildly, aggressively inconsistent to fans of the classics. Moving into part 3, the Emily Wilson translation, a modern lens on Homer. So you're probably asking, why are all these modernizations happening in the first place? Well, there's very strong evidence suggesting that Nolan is leaning heavily on Emily Wilson's highly debated 2017 translation of the Odyssey. And we have to understand, this isn't just a simple update of the language to make it easier to read. It is a foundational shift in how the story is interpreted and presented. Let's look objectively at the translator's own words. Emily Wilson stated, I tried to think as much as I could about how my own identities and histories might affect my interestedness in the poem as a woman and as a gender feminist. This specific, self-professed modern feminist lens drastically alters the tone of the ancient epic. For purists and traditionalist fans who deeply revere the original classical texts, inserting modern gender politics and a 21st century ideological framework into Homer's work acts as a massive, glaring red flag. To them, it signals that the film is way more interested in modern commentary than delivering a faithful historical adaptation.
Now, if you're wondering if Nolan is actually utilizing this specific translation, well, he has practically confirmed it himself. In major recent interviews with both Empire and Time magazines, Nolan explicitly quoted Wilson's unique translation. Most notably, he referenced her famous opening line, "Tell me about a complicated man," completely bypassing the traditional classic translations that usually refer to Odysseus as a man of many turns or a man of twists and turns. He also cited her translation directly when he was discussing how to handle the dialogue. This pretty much confirms that the entire foundation of the film is built on this modernized, ideologically shifted text, which absolutely validates the concerns that all the classical purists have been shouting about.
All right, let's look at the fallout. In Part 4, the media backlash, defending the Odyssey.
So how has the establishment reacted to the audience's profound skepticism? Well, we're currently watching entertainment media outlets rush to run interference and vigorously defend the film from all this early internet criticism. It's actually a fascinating study in modern media dynamics, where the press actively positions itself as a shield for Hollywood studios against the very audience those studios are desperately trying to attract. Outlets like Variety have published multiple articles arguing that the backlash is totally unfounded. They attempt to wave away the very real concerns of history buffs and classical literature fans by just labeling them all as a troll army. Their core argument basically boils down to this: why are you guys complaining about historical accuracy or diverse casting in a mythological fable that features a giant cyclops, a six-headed sea monster, and literal magical gods? They are using the fantasy elements of the story as a blanket excuse to completely dismiss any criticism of the film's internal logic.
But let me show you exactly why fans are fiercely rejecting that media defense. Take a look at this staggering number, 60. That is the massive 60% audience drop-off rate reported for the second season of The Rings of Power. When you combine a massive audience rejection like that with the historic bombing of the recent Snow White adaptation, which reportedly lost well over $200 million, a very, very clear pattern emerges. Audiences are fundamentally rejecting modern franchise adaptations that ignore established lore and classical roots in favor of contemporary messaging. The media can call the audience trolls all day long, but the financial metrics tell a story of total, absolute audience disconnect.
And honestly, this brings up a brilliant point that perfectly illustrates the flaw in the media's logic. There's this famous, rather funny internet meme that completely dismantles the whole "because it's fantasy, anything goes" argument. The meme goes like this: you can accept dragons, elves, and talking trees, but you can't accept the 2021 BMW 5 Series with optional heated seating. It's hilarious, but the crucial point here is that a fantasy setting absolutely does not excuse a total disregard for internal consistency, verisimilitude, and established lore. Just because magic exists in a world, that doesn't mean Renaissance plate armor belongs in the Bronze Age. The world still has to make sense within its own defined internal rules, and fans right now feel like those rules are being completely broken.
Leading us to our final section, Part 5. Will the Odyssey flop? The $250 million gamble.
Pulling all these complex, messy threads together, we have to look at the staggering box office stakes involved here. We are talking about a massive $250 million gamble. In today's cinematic landscape, a budget that astronomically high requires near universal audience appeal just to break even. Alienating a massive portion of your core audience before the movie even releases is an incredibly dangerous game. What we're seeing right now is this chaotic three-way battle raging across social media. On one side, you have the history bros absolutely furious about the Renaissance armor and the synthesizer music. On another side, you've got the culture warriors, deeply invested in the casting controversies and translation debates. And caught smack in the middle are the Nolan bros, his incredibly passionate, usually unwavering fan base. For the first time ever, Nolan's core supporters are deeply conflicted. They really want to trust the master director, but they are genuinely bewildered by these bizarre, seemingly contradictory creative choices. But before anyone rushes to declare this film a guaranteed financial disaster, let me remind you of one undeniable hard fact. Despite the intense nuclear-level online roasting, and despite the countless critical reaction videos flooding the internet, the official trailer is overwhelmingly liked by the general public. Furthermore, tickets for the premium 70mm IMAX showings sold out a literal year in advance. Just let that sink in for a second. It proves that no matter the controversy, it is incredibly tough and probably foolish to bet against Christopher Nolan. The general audience's trust in his ability to deliver massive cinematic spectacle is historically rock solid, regardless of what the internet debate cycle says.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We are watching a completely fascinating cultural and cinematic collision unfold in real time. Will the top dog of a struggling industry ultimately cave and reinforce the alienating ideas that have led to Hollywood's recent decline? Or will the sheer, undeniable filmmaking talent of the king of cinema prevail, delivering an epic that transcends the culture war entirely? Only time will tell if the spectacle of the Odyssey can actually overcome the massive weight of its own controversy. Thank you for diving deep into this explainer with me.